First, welcome all. This is a tremendous turnout and well-deserved given that this is the 25th year. And a special welcome to the 25th celebration of the Valerie Gordon International Human Rights Law Lecture, to our honorary guests and members of the Valerie Gordon family. Each year, 2 or 3 or so family members attend the event from all over the country. Today, we're particularly pleased to welcome actually 8 members of Valerie's family on this august occasion, including her sister, the Reverend Dr. Carolyn Gordon, her husband, Christian Lamar, and her son, Faluke. And I was telling Faluke, I remember the first time we had the lecture, he was, and now look at him, it's really a blessing. Also, a special welcome to our keynote speaker, Alfred Brownell, who is our distinguished scholar in the Program for Human Rights and the Global Economy, as well as the Northeastern University School of Law, Bo Biden chair. I'm actually jealous of all of Alfred's titles, but he deserves it given his many accomplishments. The annual Valerie Gordon Human Rights Lecture celebrates the memory of the late Valerie Gordon, Northeastern University School of Law, class of 1993, a fierce advocate for human rights in the U.S. as well as internationally. The lecture invites outstanding lawyers, judges, scholars, and advocates who work to advance human rights to deliver a keynote address at the law school. Today, Alfred Brownell will join 24 other dignitaries in delivering this venerable lecture to us. Some of those, and they're very nicely laid out on the cover, are Randall Robinson, Executive Director of Trans-Africa, Decima Williams, UN Ambassador from Grenada, the Honorable Nathaniel R. Jones, the Honorable Albie Sachs of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, and most recently, Brian Stevenson. So, Alfred, you're in very good company, but also very well-deserved company. Valerie Gordon was an African-American lawyer and a highly respected and valued member of this community, a former journalist and longtime anti-racism and women's rights activist. She was an active and committed member of the Kemet chapter of the Black Law Student Association. She was also a co-founder of the Students of Color Coalition. The SCC advocated for increased awareness and law school action on faculty and student diversity, an end to institutional racism, and attention to race, culture, and difference in law school curriculum. Valerie was also an advocate for social justice, both in the U.S. as well as internationally, including South Africa. On a personal note, I fondly remember Valerie as one of our most engaged and brilliant students, a true star. She met and married Christian Lamar, also class of 1993, and also a true star, while in law school. Because of her enormous impact here at our law school and beyond, in her honor and in conjunction with the lecture, the law school's chapter of the Black Law Students Association sponsors a human rights essay contest for first-year law students. The author of the winning essay is given the Spirit of Valerie Gordon Award. Last year's winner, Hakeem Muhammad, will introduce this year's recipient. Again, I thank everyone for joining us today and call to the podium Hakeem. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hakeem, and I'm really honored to be passing off the torch and introducing our this year's winners of the Valerie Gordon Award, Jasmine Brown. Jasmine Brown was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, and moved to Boston from North Carolina. She attended Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where she received a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology and a minor in American Ethnic Studies in May 2018. While at Wake Forest, Jasmine worked with Winston-Salem's Board of Education on their curriculum committee as a teacher's assistant, trying to ensure that students in Winston-Salem's overpopulated and predominantly minority schools had the same educational opportunities as others from more privileged schools. She also worked with the Children's Law Center of Central North Carolina and the center's court appointed guardian advocating for children involved in high conflict custody and domestic violence cases. Additionally, Jasmine spent time helping the university and deans create, implement, and collect feedback on initiatives and programs concerning diversity, inclusion, and equity. Jasmine came to law school because she saw in the legal profession a space where she could help support the work of her community in a meaningful way. Jasmine chose Northeastern University School of Law because she wanted to learn how to support and positively impact the communities in a collaborative environment dedicated to making sure that the focus of the people and communities involved in complex legal issues. She plans on focusing her law career in the area of human rights and international law, just like Valerie Gordon. And she wrote our winning essay, the winning essay for this year, titled A Study on Winston-Salem's Food Insecurity and Solutions for Establishing the Human Right to Food. Thank you. Well, this is the award letter from the Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really an honor to receive this award. I'm going to read some excerpts from my essay, The Hungry Among Us. So, the US is one of the richest countries in the world. However, here, 40 million people, 6.5 million of them being children, lack access to affordable, nutritious, and fresh food. The United States Department of Agriculture defines food insecurity as household level economic and social conditions of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. When large populations of food insecure people live in close proximity to one another, these create food deserts. And the USDA defines food deserts as 500 or more, or 33% or more, of the population who must travel farther than a mile in urban or 10 miles for rural areas to their closest grocery stores. So groups that are trying to solve food security or insecurity generally propose two solutions. First, providing and supplementing grocery stores, corner stores, and farmers markets with food from community gardens and local farms. And second would be adding grocery stores to the community. The first, rather than the second, is seen as the more socially responsible of the two, particularly because when you add grocery stores to the community, there are various reasons why people won't go, including lack of resources, education, and taste. Also, when you add grocery stores to a community as anchor stores to bring in smaller businesses, this can lead to the gentrification of poor communities of color. Food deserts are an example of environmental racism, particularly because the leading predictor for food deserts and insecurity is segregation by race and income inequality. This leads to health problems which disproportionately impact communities of color like obesity, stroke, hypertension, and heart disease. A study in 2011 ranked Winston-Salem as the worst area in the United States for food security. Winston-Salem is located in Forsyth County and is the fifth most populous city in North Carolina. It is also a majority minority city. However, here 40 neighborhoods are designated by the USDA as food deserts, mostly in East Winston-Salem, which is a predominantly Black area. Winston-Salem is simply an example of the ways that food deserts and food insecurity are a manifestation of the deep and pervasive history of racism. The city of Winston-Salem took a number of intentional and oppressive steps in order to create racial homogeneity in neighborhoods. In the 1890s, it started with racial covenants, which of course we know were overturned by Shelley in 1948. But then they turned to segregation ordinances in 1910, which were later overturned by the North Carolina Supreme Court in the 1940s. However, they always had redlining to turn to in the 1930s, which of course was banned by the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And when all of that happened, in 1960s, the city enacted or approved an urban renewal project for the creation of U.S. Highway 52 and Interstate 40, which drove a wedge between the community and dissected them, destroying Black neighborhoods. These racial tensions did not stop there. In the 1940s and 50s, the Department of Medical Genetics at Bowman Gray School of Medicine, now Wake Forest University, Bowman Gray campus, received $100,000 from a philanthropist known to pay for research that attempted to prove that whites were superior to Blacks, and also was a eugenics supporter. With that money, they began a eugenic sterilization experiment program, and women of color were at a higher risk of forced sterilization. The latest light, however, has been the Wake Forest University Innovation Quarter. It's a $100 million office, laboratory, and educational space built in the same area where the Black neighborhoods were decimated by urban renewal. This is just simply another way that they are trying to gentrify Black communities out of existence. But Black women in Winston-Salem have never stopped pushing back, beginning with lessening the effects of food insecurity on their communities. Especially Councilwoman Dee Dee Adams, who recently ran for Congress. She has been representing the North Ward since 2009. She pushed the mayor to address food insecurity, which he did not do for 14 years, and pushed for the application of the CHAMPS grant, which was money received in order to bolster the work of other Black women in the community, particularly Rosemary Stimson, who was the first lady of Ezekiel Amy Zion Church. When she came to Winston-Salem in 2004, she began a summer meal site for children who received free and reduced lunch. What started off as one meal site in 2004 turned into 28 by 2018. In one summer, she can expect to serve over 65,000 meals. Another woman is Maddie Young, who is considered the mayor of Cleveland Avenue neighborhood. She tends, operates, and manages one of the largest community gardens in Winston-Salem and teaches children about the historical significance of certain foods such as okra, butter beans, and sweet potatoes. Also, she's 92 years young. The right to food is a fundamental human right codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, and the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These are two of the three documents which make up the International Bill of Human Rights, which the U.S. has signed but not ratified. Furthermore, in Sosa v. Alvarez McCain, the UDHR, or the court held that the UDHR does not on its own impose obligations as a matter of law. Luckily, we don't need federal law to create a right to food in municipal governments. Belo Horizonte in Brazil codified the right to food in 1993, almost 20 years before their national government did. They appointed a 20-member council made up of citizens, people from labor and business industries, and church representatives in order to implement a goal of completely overhauling the city's food systems in collaboration with the relevant departments such as health, education, parks and spaces, and waste management. For them, a successful policy meant that you were integrating a farmer's interests as well as the food consumers. Belo Horizonte created working groups which can be transferred locally, particularly in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There are 6 of them. First being food and nutritional assistant, second being subsidized food marketing, third being promotion of urban agriculture, fourth, supply and food market regulation, fifth, the mobilization and education for food consumption, and sixth, employment and income generation. Several methods have been used in order to integrate these into their local community, including the creation of food markets in urban and non-urban communities, the creation of public regulated restaurants, and the implementation of community classes on nutrition. So when I was looking at how Winston-Salem can implement this into their policies, I created a team with an acronym called HUNGER, helping to unfold nutrition initiatives geared towards the elimination of racism, which would involve community stakeholders and relevant municipal departments, including education and health and parks and rec. I've created 6 parallel working groups, being increasing food sovereignty of the community, linking local food producers directly to consumers. 3rd, creating urban food systems. 4th, using governmental monies to stimulate agricultural production and create jobs. 5th, education about food security and nutrition. And 6th, integrating and regulating supply chains. There were several ideas that I had, but I created a few as to how Winston-Salem can start giving back to their community, especially creating an Office of Sustainable Initiatives for Food and Nutrition, and creating an office for community business, creating growers' marketplaces in each of the food deserts that are designated, where you could sell straight from the farm or community gardens. Or placing one community garden in every school, creating public commons restaurants, which would be regulated by the city, using community gardens, beginning with the least food insecure communities for food for public department meals, and then creating community nutrition classes and curriculum and overhauling the curriculum in the school pertaining to health and nutrition. I also recommended that they hire Rosemary Stimson and use Maddie Young as an advisor. In conclusion, being informed by human rights standards and other innovative solutions in international cities, Winston-Salem can combat food insecurity, and which is, one of the ongoing remnants of institutional racism. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Ennin. I'm the director of the program on human rights in the global economy here at the law school. The program is known by its initials, PHRGE, which we lovingly pronounce PHRGE. It is a true honor to be here with you tonight. I graduated from this very special law school in 2008. That was too late, alas, to meet Valerie Gordon. But I have heard many, many, many wonderful things about her, and I've come to deeply appreciate her legacy here at the law school. It was not too late, however, to meet Professor Hope Lewis. Professor Hope Lewis, I see the heads nodding, had as her life mission the promotion of human rights, both beyond this law school and within its walls. She taught beautiful courses on human rights. I took every one she offered. Professor Hope Lewis was instrumental in the founding not only of PHRGE, but in the institution of the annual Valerie Gordon Human Rights Lecture. I do not want to be presumptuous, but I believe that that Professor Hope Lewis would be thrilled to see 25 years on that we are all still gathering here together. We are all still gathering here together in communion with Valerie Gordon's family to honor her life and to honor her legacy. We are still gathering here together to recognize that the promotion of human rights is central to the mission of this law school. We are still gathering here together 25 years on to learn from the incredible students like Hakeem and Jasmine who have taught us so much over the years through their essays. And we are still gathering here to learn from the illustrious and inspirational keynote speakers who have graced this podium for 25 years. Speaking of which, Alfred Brownell is my friend and my colleague, and it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce you to him tonight. Alfred is an extraordinary human rights activist. He was born in Liberia, a country in West Africa. As a young man, he became outraged over the fact that the government was getting richer and richer and richer, and the people were getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And how could that be in a country with so many natural resources, including its stunning tropical forests? Alfred came to understand that the government was achieving this through something called a land grab. The government was stealing the land out from under the feet of indigenous peoples who had lived in Liberia for centuries. And they were selling the land to the highest bidder, multinational corporations who came and evicted the people, who took all of the timber, who took all of the natural resources, who raised the land and planted lucrative crops. They gave nothing to the people. The people were being displaced. Alfred decided to spend his life devoted to the task of promoting the right to land for indigenous peoples in Liberia and elsewhere. He was motivated by the conviction that land rights are foundational human rights, that in protecting the land rights, especially of marginalized people, we can alleviate poverty, we can promote gender equality, and we can reduce these horrible evictions that triggered very, very problematic migration flows. Alfred devoted his life to this task, and even at his young age, he has been extraordinarily successful. He earned a JD and an LLM and helped rewrite the laws that govern the environment in Liberia. He founded the Green Advocates, an extraordinary non-government organization in Liberia. And over the years, he has worked to connect the Green Advocates to a growing network of international organizations now fighting for land rights. One of the secret ingredients of his success is that he believes very firmly that he must stand in solidarity with those who are affected by these land grabs. Alfred goes out into the villages and he listens hard to the people there, including, most importantly, or very importantly, the women. Alfred has worked in collaboration with the villagers on one hand and with his growing network of international colleagues on the other, and he has taken these multinational corporations to court, and he has won millions of dollars for indigenous peoples. It's an extraordinary achievement. This came at a huge price for Alfred. His success in defending the rights of indigenous people to their land meant that he really and truly angered very powerful people in the government of Liberia and in these multinational corporations. He survived death threats. He survived assassination attempts. But in the fall of 2016, he had to flee to protect his own life and the lives of his beloved family members. And so he came to Northeastern, where he is now a role model in virtue of his courage, his integrity, and his tenacity. We all benefit in ways too hard to describe from him being here with us now. Now Alfred spends part of his time raising the next generation of amazing human rights activists and teaching us all about the centrality of human rights and the centrality of land rights. He is also still extremely involved in working on an international plane to protect land rights the world over. Tonight, Alfred will be talking to us on resilience, resistance, and the law, innovative strategies for stopping discriminatory land grabs. It is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce him to you. Please help me welcome him to the podium, Professor Alfred Brownell.
Thank you. I'm not too sure after what Elizabeth has delivered, I'm able to say anything more. I think she's probably has seen what I wanted to say, so she said it. But it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here in terms of dispensing with protocol, the dean, faculty, the family with Valerie Gordon and others. Before I say anything, I just want to ask us to just stand up for a minute of silence in memory of this incredible woman who's changed so much. 1 minute, please. Who else stand up? Thank you. You know, I did not meet Valerie Gordon, but I believe that I have met her spiritually. I believe that the things she's done, the institutions she set up, the platforms she created, the parts she stirred up to allow for diversity in this institution is paying up the dividend. I am one of the beneficiary of that process. Imagine, never heard of this person, live in a faraway place in West Africa, like Elizabeth described, busy doing my work, trying to help the poor and support them, angering folks, got attacked on the point where people have decided that they wanted my head, wanted my heart, wanted to dismember me, and I had to take flight. I had to find a place to get a refuge. And partners around the world were just on their nerve as trying to find a place to provide rescue for me and my family, to leave Liberia quickly so that I'm able to pursue my work in dignity. You can imagine what that is. The clock is ticking. They are calling every single way. They have an activist. He's been threatened. We have to get him out. And people were worried that if they hadn't done something to get me off, how would they have lived the next day if I had been caught and had been taken to the slaughter? What would they have said? Northeastern University Law School came to the call. And the program on human rights and environment became my refuge. And Valerie Gordon is an important individual whose work influenced and led to the setup of this institution. Her work in promoting rights across the globe, no matter what it is. I'm sure, looking back into the past, she never ever anticipated that someone like me from West Africa would be here and would benefit from something like this. That those who stand in the balance and are fighting rights, and when they are threatened, because they, like I always say, are the firewood, when they are threatened, that there will be a refuge for them. She's gone, but she's here because I am a beneficiary of that. And I want, being on this stage today, to tell you, thank you for having such a family person who've done so well for all of us. And I'm just not the first who's going to become a living testimony of the work that Valerie Gordon have done. That is, that in all of us, there is a leader. Sometimes we believe that you need a crowd, you need more to do so. But just you can stand up and you can bring about the change. When you are not happy about something, when you're prepared to stand up and put everything on the line. Because you believe when you give and you protect, sometimes people believe that you're actually protecting others. You are giving to others, but you are giving to yourself. This is the true humanity in us. And that was the exemplary role that Valerie played in this institution. And I'm very happy to see that. Now to my text. Land rights. So I'm thinking, and I wrote an academic paper to deliver here today, but there's a part of me who is the activist who's conflicting with how I should be able to present what I want to talk about land. I know all of us in this room have a lot of understanding what it is to have a right to land and what the whole concept of property right is. But I thought that I would start by trying to just share with you a couple of data, just to see what it is. We heard when the Spirit Award winner came up and gave some statistics, and I'm sure most of you were creeping in your skin, because even my daughter, who sat by me, pinched me and said, "Is that true, Daddy?" Is it true? Is it really true that in the great United States, that there are 40 million people who go hungry every single day? In this trillion and trillion of dollars of GDP, that you are unable to feed your citizens, your people. They speak volume. But I want to just give you a few statistics to show exactly how these things are all linked. And how, for example, the right to food is one of the pillars of the right to land. If you want to address the right to land, part of that pillar is the right to food. And how that right implicates mutually those both. So most of us are aware, as the clock is ticking, in my last count today, just before I came here, I checked online, we are about 7.7 billion around the world. That is the last count I've seen today, 7.7 billion. That's how the world population is growing. 7.7 billion. It means we have to find a place for people to live, to eat, and to sleep. Up to 2 billion people, which represent 1/4 of the world population, have been estimated to be what? Landless. 2 billion don't have a land. And to be more specific, so you see what we're talking about, they zero in down to a particular corner of the world, and they pick up a corner in Southeast Asia referred to as Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, here's what the data is. They're seeing on 144,000 square kilometers of land, 144,000 square kilometers of land. There's an estimated 150 million people on 144 square meters of land. The further says, around the globe, there are 10 million stateless people who have been denied citizenship. They don't have a piece of real estate. They are wandering. 10 million roaming like in the constellation, stateless. It goes further to say, in my last count today, there are 69 million refugees having fled war and violence and persecution. So, uprooted from their land, trying to find another place. Don't know whether they're going to have a place to balance themselves. 69 million. Those of the people that over the last 20 years I have worked for in my country, in West Africa and all around the world, mainly community indigenous people, The UN estimates that there are over 370 million indigenous people, and they have found them in 70 countries worldwide. Those indigenous people represent 5% of the world population. They account for 15% of those who are extremely poor. They occupy and use a quarter of the world's surface area, and they are the keepers, the custodians, and the guardians of 80% of the remaining biodiversity across the planet. 370 million people, 5% are the guardians of this diversity, which is the source of all we're talking about. It's food, it's fuel, it's fiber that we draw from that diversity. And much more than that, where most of us sometimes will hardly notice, which is linked to the sort of work I've been doing to trying to protect forests, is how they have protected forests. And sometimes folks, like me, I have been characterized as a tree hugger. And so you hug the tree. And I say, I wear this badge of honor to become a tree hugger. Then I turn them back and I ask, did you realize that if I just ask you for 2 minutes to hold your breath, that you are going to drop dead? That when you slept last night, in your comfort, covered, and had a nice dream, and you breathed this fresh air, did you ever notice where that clean breath of air and oxygen was coming from? Have you ever thought that the tree that you believe you are stigmatizing me into hug is the one that is producing this oxygen? And so I've asked, do you know what you do for me? When you get up tomorrow morning, will you kindly walk to the tree and give it a hug? Just a little bit of tender love and say, thank you. Thank you. Because sometimes you hardly acknowledge that that tree is life. If it gets angry and decides not to produce that oxygen, you are going to find a space in the few corners where they're going to put you back to Mother Nature. So wear an honor of bias to believe that this is responsible for you, because sometimes you don't know, consciously or unconsciously, that as you move around and you don't even think what is happening, it is just quietly just supplying you that sweet oxygen that allows you to move and do what you want to do without trying to observe it. So yes, I am a very proud tree hugger. And the folks who are custodians of 80% of these trees around the world, is an honor to stand up to fight and defend them. Few more statistics. The other thing that I want you to know is that there's an estimated 258 million people living in the country other than their own. I think you know what that is. There's a whole thing about migration and migrants. There's a lot of conversation here in the US about what that really is. 258 million. So, and we'll talk about the US about the 40 million, okay. But coming back to the land issue and the grabbing of land, there's been a lot of disagreement about what that really is. There's both a historical context, which I'm going to walk you through, Because sometimes we believe that, when we say land grabbing, people believe it just now, but all of us know that there's a history. We all know what happened. We all know how great states are formed and empire are built and countries are established. We all know how that have influenced all kinds of transformation and dynamic across the globe, whatever it is. So I'm going to talk more about that. And at those times, people did not refer to them as grabbing. There's a historical context. But let me tell you what the consensus is. Even though there's been this difference of what land grabbing really is, which I'm talking about, is that the grabbing involve large-scale acquisition for commercial or industrial purposes, agriculture, biofuel, mining, logging, big infrastructure, tourism. Yes, tourism. Protected areas, national parks. And someone will say, well, how preserving, a part of the ecosystem by setting up a protected area will amounts to what a grabbing really is. And hopefully we'll have time, we'll talk about that today in what the grabbing really is going to be like. And sometimes it involves anywhere from 200 hectares. There's a threshold of 1,000, and many involve more than 10,000 hectares and several more than 500,000. And one of the important features of this grabbing is that there's hardly any form of consultation, very little, if it is ever done, and compensation from those for who it is really taken. Experts differ on the area and amount currently of land that's being grabbed. There's just a wide range of different data. Some of us in civil society have been accused of trying to really escalate such a data because the few want to be able to draw attention. But I think what we all have agreed on is that the consensus is between 20 to 60 million hectares around the world. And what I want to talk is how communities, indigenous people, public interest lawyers have organized to find a way to protect this. If you follow the data that I just gave to you about landlessness, about displacements, about the poor, about migration, about refugees, about the amount of diversity that people are having, you will see why this is a problem. You will see why when the poor and the minority and the marginalized have possession of 80% of what the rest of us need, and they are weak, how that amounts to what this is, and how you now need to organize to find a way to address that in terms of advocacy strategy, in terms of legal strategy, in terms of policy strategy. Have you done all of those? Because you have to imagine what this land grab is about. And sometimes this is where, the conceptualization of rights, whether it is right to food or whether it's property right, where there is some variance and diversion. And part of that is based on the dynamics, especially in terms of US law, of American exceptionalism that believes the non-application of a number of international and global standards. And it's stressing that those standards that the US itself has been a leader around. Who has driven the human rights movement? Who is noted to be linked to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights? Who? You've been a leader of this. And sometimes it's interesting how these standards are set, and there's a leader, and when it comes down to see how you apply that to American citizens, there's an exception. They're like, this is good for what the war is supposed to be. But when 40 million people are hungry, you don't have a right to food. And that also comes down to property rights, what we're talking about. I remember when I came here and I started looking at the research I'm doing, developing this index to measure and rank how governments are protecting the rights of their citizens, especially the vulnerable ones. And I was having a conversation with a number of folks about what that would be like. And someone said, well, are you looking at South America? You're looking at the Caribbeans, Central America, Africa, Southeast Asia, because, the law in the U.S. is very clear on the right to property. The Supreme Court have made very clear decisions in terms of the jurisprudence. There's predictability about what that is. On that route, where it's going to be. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to focus on other stuff. And then as I look at my research around what that is, and I started to look at some of the implications of how poor, color, and minority communities were being gentrified. And I said, oh, well, isn't this right to learn? So no, just hustling. People know it's a leasehold thing, it's a housing issue, and And I say, this is more than just hustling. This is more than just gentrification. I had a conversation with a friend, and I used the word, I said, this is gentricide. This is gentricide. How will people who live in the community, 2, 3 generations, for 150 years, develop a history of that community, develop a culture of that community, develop a tradition of that community, develop a family of that community, develop an entrepreneurship built up from nothing, thriving in that community. Rights, and I'm very clear what that is, rights passed down from the great-grandparents to the grandparents, to the son or the daughter, and is looking forward to pass that on to the grand, and then a development comes and say, you have to get out. You have to move. And someone said, well, it's not linked to the land, it's just the hustling. And it's just been gentrification. I said, no, it is gentricide. You kill the history. You kill the culture. You kill the tradition. You kill the custom. You kill the way of life. You kill a religion that was set in those communities. You kill it. It is gentricide. And that's what land grabbing is. When you go around the world and you go to communities, and people who live on those lands for centuries, who are the keepers of the diversity, and that land is grabbed. It's not just a physical asset. This is not how communities feel what the land is. And I'm sure here in the United States, those communities who are facing or are struggling with gentricide, I'm just looking at a fact that I have a 10 by 11 bedroom. That's what it is. You look at everything else that embody what that is going to be. And you take that away. Some of them, this is the only community they know. Their whole life, they live there. It's what they call home. It's where their root is. It's where they consider themselves to be indigenous. And that is move. That's what land grabbing is. This is what it's doing to communities across the globe. This is the struggle that I have been involved with trying to protect rights to land. And this is how the communities have built up the resilience to resist what that grabbing is. Because when you remove them, especially in areas where people have an affinity. So imagine in Liberia or in South America, where the communities who consider land to be a sacred areas. So there's a religion, there's a culture, there's a shrine that they get up every single day. And we'll talk more about that in one case I'm going to show. Where they see a river as a place to go to pray. And then an investment comes, and the decision is made, and is wiped off. Where they worship every single week is desecrated and is obliterated to make way for agriculture, for mining, and for logging. Areas where there are great warriors, those who inspire them, who led them to develop those towns, their chiefs and others who were revealed in those communities. Those sacred areas obliterated and removed. You're not just displacing them from the physical piece of real estate. You're taking the very essence away from them. So, if you were a Hindu, or you were a Muslim, or you were a Buddhist, and the development came to remove your mosque, or to remove your temple, or you were a Catholic, and they went to a room to try to remove that and put in an oil palm, what would the reaction be? What would the reaction be? I think part of that reaction and conceptualization is how, for example, people have stereotyped the poor, the marginalized, and poor of color who have lived in communities. That these people are poor, they are poverty-stricken, they live in a misery, and that those who are bringing development have come to save them out of that misery, to lift them up, while trying to figure out what is done. So when you see people in that way, it means they are of a lesser being. And so if they have a place to worship, and they have a place that linked to their culture and their religion, it is inferior. So all of that then get wiped off the land. That's what the grabbing rate is. And so this, in fact, in terms of our contemporary process, was accelerated based on the food crisis between 2008 and somewhere where there were many countries that decided that where as the population is rising, we need to find more food. And there were also people who were speculators who were on the market trying to allow for the erratic up and down of the food markets. So they had to find a place to go and grow food. But there's also a demand. Countries in Europe and the US have put into place legislation. The whole idea of trying to go renewable, you have to find a land to grow all of those things. So there was a rush for what that would be like. And so the grab went on and started targeting the very poor in those communities. And that led to the grabbing. And that led to how people were facing those problems. And so, like I said, even though this is what we see now, it is important to try to take us a little back into the history. Because, like I said, this is not very new. So my good friend, Lawrence Rudad, and myself, Maggie, they argued in a piece of law review article they wrote, Large-Scale Land Acquisition, a Historical Perspective. And they said that the acquisition of land grabbing has been historical and is informing many of the trends that we see currently. For example, they point to tombstone inscription in early Egypt, where during the 3rd millennium, several villages were obliged to provide unpaid labor and land towards the pharaoh. The review analyzed 4 of these trends. They talk about the latifundia of ancient Rome, the enclosure in the UK, and latifundia in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies of America. In comparing past grabbing with the present, they found, like I said, some great similarities. They found that there were a small number of beneficiaries and a large number of dispossessed, as we see today. They found there were exploitation of all or part of the land and the labor of those dispossessed. They found that as the dispossession was going on, that communities were resilient and resisted, as we see this. They found during those times that there were laws, as we see in many countries around, that favor acquisitions. And then they found that there were decisive role of government that legitimized some of the discussion and narrative and discourse around the grabbing during the historical time. So in ancient Rome, for example, in the 5th century, Rome had a peasant army who protected against attack from neighbors. The army grew and became experienced and then started conquering states and expropriating large amounts of land. And they declared that area as agor publicus, land belonging to the Roman people, which also included mines, sword works, and treasure of the conquered people, enslaving hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war, who then were used to become slaves to manage this land. Large estates called latifundia were thus created, leased out, and sold to dozens and even thousands of hectares of land to the lords and the senate who were controlling this. These were divided into multiple different holdings of few dozens or few hundred hectares, which might be spread across different regions. Most owners did not live on them. They were distant owners like we see today with transnational corporations who live far away and control land in many countries, except occasionally for leisure purposes. It delegated the task of supervision to their steward. As the size and extent of their area increased through the use of cheap land and labor, they grew wine and olive, and they started a massive export business for these. They gained market share at the expense of the small and medium-sized holding, which could not survive the competition. As a consequence, the countryside became depopulated. A large number of peasants who then were in the army were being killed. Many others, impoverished by the competition they faced, abandoned the land and became plebeians in the city in Rome. Even though there was serious effort at land reform, they were insufficient to stem the rural exodus and the swelling of Rome, plebeian population. The empire slowly sank into the military economic impasse. And of course, you know, the rest is history. The land. That was Rome, grabbing the land around the state and how they end up. Then today, what has informed our Eurocentric conceptualization of property rights, the whole idea of fee simple ownership, is linked to common law in the United Kingdom. It's something called the enclosure in Great Britain. And the historical context is this. Students of European history often link the Black Death to food and health crisis of the 14th century, which halved the population of Europe. Land was a critical element. As the feudal system faced a crisis, self-demanded pay job, some became rich and controlled a number of common pasture and forests. Small farm thus evolved on the ruins of the feudal system, run by independent freeholders called yeomen. However, in the 16th century, the landlords formed alliances with their tenant farmers and began forcibly to take possession of common farm by independent peasants. They demarcated the new boundaries of their estate. They demarcated the new boundary of their estate, closing them off by means of hedges or low stone walls. Hence the term enclosure given to this process of appropriation and dispossession. Many peasants were then driven out, and individual houses or even whole villages were razed to the ground. Many other peasants lost all or part of their access to common individual land and were therefore deprived of a larger part of their livelihood. Well, what happened? Many of the poor and unemployed immigrated. That's its history. Immigrated to North America, to Australia, to Southern Africa, where there were vast territories being seized by foes from the inhabitants. There's a lot to learn from the history of grabbing, right? The Spanish and the Portuguese. So in 1492, something happened. Do you know what that was? The armies of the Catholic monarch of Spain completed the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims. A few months later, Christopher Columbus landed in the Bahamas, opening up the new world to the Spanish crown. The Spanish who set out to conquer the Americas from this time onward were mostly penniless nobles who had borrowed necessary capital from merchants and bankers to fund their arms travel and settlement in the Americas, as well as the court of the seven with whom they surrounded themselves. There were also royal officials, soldiers, and clerics. In debt and greedy for profit, they began by pillaging the treasure of the defeated indigenous societies. You know a lot of that. I don't want to bore you with it. Then they set about exploiting the gold and silver mines. From the outset of the conquest, the royal authorities confiscated the conquered territories and distributed them as encomiendas. They were immense feudal fiefdom to expedition leaders, soldiers, royal officials. For example, Henry Curtis, who defeated the Aztec Empire, received around 4 million hectares of land. On the territory of the former Inca Empire, the population, which has been around 10 million, fell to 2.5, then to 1.4, and at a level which remained unchanged until the early 19th century. As a result of criticism, they decided to replace that with another form of estate and decided to give out tens and thousands of acres to those who were part of this whole process. Of course, the Catholic Church became the biggest landowner, and some chiefs were rewarded for being compliant. And I'm sure those who are our Spanish brothers and sisters, they will say, the conquistadors. In Brazil, large-scale land grabbing was carried out by the Portuguese, who created large plantations with a labor force consisting of slaves that they captured from among the indigenous. Over time, labor became scarcer. The indigenous would decide to go more inward, and there were large amount of land left with plantations established. And they needed to find the labor to address this. So what happened? Slaves then began to be imported from Africa to replace this. The lands. These large land grab gave way to very significant transfer of wealth to Spain and Portugal and formed the basis of the feudal land system that has endured even today in South America. I'm sure you are not surprised, and I always say this, we see the river, but we don't see the tributaries. So when you see folks who are moving, sometimes beneath that veneer of why people are trekking, yes, I'll be the first to admit land is not the only means, it's not the only source. But insecurity of land is one of the most important factors that is driving the migration. And people feel very insecure on their land. There's a historical context which I lay out. And there's also a question about what today we call our molding property right paradigm. History is in a lesson for us. If we saw how that was established, by how there was an attempt to move off the serf, the more powerful warlords and yeomen, cutting them off and suffocating them. You understand what that was supposed to be? And so I want to talk about, and I don't know how much time I'm having. To talk more about 5 minutes. 5 minutes more. 5 minutes more, I beg you, please. I want to talk more about what we now see in terms of our contemporary land grabbing process and how we've seen that communities, especially indigenous ones, have worked towards trying to protect those land areas. So I want to talk about two cases. One in South America from Nicaragua that have set the fundamental international jurisprudence for rights to land, and another case in Africa that have also set very important jurisprudence. So when it comes to property right, I said earlier on, and it comes to land, this is why it is so different. What the land really is. When you grab the land, you're not just grabbing a piece of real estate. You grab the history, you grab the culture, you grab the religion, you grab the tradition, you grab the custom, you grab the way of life. And you grab all the other things that are valid to what that land really is. And so legal scholars, especially in Judicial Forum, have tried to figure out how to protect this. Because part of what the question was about, people who live in the collectives, who don't have the sort of so-called land title processes, like what was set up in the enclosure in the United Kingdom, who were unable to build the hedges and set up the stone to demarcate them, who decided that as a group, we'll all use it together, we'll all benefit together. It's for us, we'll transfer the generation, and we own this collectively. And I think that Eurocentric construction was very difficult to try to adapt towards that process. And so in Nicaragua, the Iron Stinkies, who were indigenous people, notice that the government of Nicaragua has signed a lease agreement with a South Korean timber company to come and take away timber from on their land. And they challenged that process. They say, we live here, we have rights ancestrally, historically. And what they talked about was how they did not consult them. So in challenging that, this is a historical right, and also on the basis of how the Nicaraguan constitution has protected them, they went to the courts, the judicial bodies, the tribunal, they went through the whole system. And in fact, at the first in the magisterial court, that petition was denied. Then they went to the next circuit, and then they got judgment. And they went to the second circuit, and it was confirmed. It went to the Constitutional Court and all the way up to the Supreme Court. But the government was unable to try to protect those rights. It was unable to demarcate those rights because they felt that they didn't have that sort of right. And so they decided to use the instrumentality of the regional human rights system, which is the Inter-American Commission. And so they brought their petition. The government decided to challenge those petitions and felt that, well, these are just like indigenous people. They live on part of the land. It's not the whole place. So they have no right to claim this. And we are the government, and we are the sovereign. And the reason why we grant this right to extract the timber is because of our interest in developing this. So there's a clash of the right to develop, which the government felt they were doing by trying to extract the timber and generate resources, and there was a right for these people to be consulted and to obtain their consent, and for them to freely dispose of their natural resources. And just for time, they won. It was a time the commission transferred its case to the court, and for the first time under international law, it was stated that in order to put development on the land of indigenous people, the rights they have is very collective. You have to obtain their free, prior, informed consent. Free, prior, informed consent being the part of international jurisprudence. And the Anwar Tinky case have informed many other jurisprudence across the world. It started off in regional mechanism, and there are a series of domestic court cases that have now used this right. In Africa, in Kenya, the recent case, and I want to say something, this case, and this is what we talk about resilience and resistance. They started this case in 1995. And the struggle through, when they finally got decision, it was in 2008. To calculate how much year it took for these people to resist, to mobilize, and the resilience to make sure that that right was recognized under international law. Then in Africa, there's the Ojek. They live in the forest as well. The government of Kenya decided to give this right out. A couple of things. One, to set up a national reserve to protect, important species of animals against the Ojek people. And the Ojek people said, well, you can do this because this land, like I said before, is part of our history. It's part of our religion. So they challenged that through the court system. And as they went, the Kenyan government fought them at every single level of the system. They could not succeed. So they went to the African Commission. And the commission heard that case. They invited the government of Kenya, who didn't want to come. And then they finally had to go to the African court. And the court relied upon and was thinking for Nicaragua. Said, first and foremost, you have to respect the free, prior, informed consent of these people. The Ojek had complained that the Kenyan government had not respected their right to culture, their right to religion, because they were evicted. And for the fact they were unable to go back on their land, it means that their religious right to pray and worship were being denied. For the fact that they were evicted, it means that the right to freely dispose of natural resources was being denied. And the Kenyan government could not see what that was. They said, as part of our obligation under international law, international environmental law, the owner to set aside protected areas. We felt that the forest area was a reserve. And the court said, no, you have to balance this act. You have to make sure that when you're considering these different rights, you can feel that the right to preserve is more valuable than the right to pray. The right to observe a culture, the right to ensure that this is sufficient is more valuable than that. And so they could then rule that you needed to respect the free, prior, informed consent. So we see as the NWA thinking now in Africa it's become a widespread jurisprudence. Just to conclude, one more minute. Is that if we look at what I said about the history and the jurisprudence and what has happened contemporary, which I try to explain a lot of that, we can certainly see that there's a couple of trends that we're seeing now. I said that before. Current land grabbing benefits only a small elite number of actors, entrepreneurs, companies, shareholders, managers, investors, and the public. Even though this land is owned by the indigenous people, by the communities, this have to benefit. The communities, they lost everything. We talk about that. Not just the land. They're unable to worship and everything. Employment is very temporary. Most time it's slave-like labor. I'm a witness of that. It's characterized by violence, and I have seen that in my work. I have seen the use of the police. I myself am a witness. In my work in Liberia, when we won the case against this company, and we brought the international inspection to come and verify that they were not following their instructions, and we went to visit the company site, the owners were not happy because the indigenous people had complained that there was an area called Palo Hill. Palo Hill was a traditional shrine that the locals would pay regular pilgrimage to every 4 months to go and worship. The company knew that this was a site of pilgrimage for the global tech people. And the company decided that this was the site that was going to place its mill to produce the palm. Talking about discrimination. Very clear that it did not want them to worship. So it transformed it. So we took the inspection to see what that was. When we went and they inspected that site, on our way back, and most of you have read about that, but you have not heard from me, our vehicle was surrounded by armed guards of the company who were angry that we had taken an international inspector team to go and see what this was done. When we say that these things are carried out, this is what I'm telling you. More than 150 men. Where's the lawyer? Where's Mr. Brownell? Where's Councilor Brownell? Because it was difficult to see me because I was, dressed like the ordinary communities. I was not in my suit and everything. I had my backpack, my jeans, and my flip-flop slippers in the car sitting down. So they didn't know. Then someone said, "Oh, he's in the front." And they phoned me and they started to hit and bang the car. Then someone brought chalk. They started putting the chalk around their faces. And they started to dance. They were happy. You could see the cheers that they had seen that prayer. And they started to threaten. "Oh, we're going to kill you. You're not going to live today. We are so happy." You could see the joy as the company security was dancing around my vehicle, trying to inflate the tire. And it's threatening what they would do to me. Tomorrow, my boss is going to drink his palm wine from out of your skull. You are going to take off your hat. And they dance and they dance. Then they set up a bonfire. And they put a pot on the fire. Then they brought some herbs and put the herbs into the fire. And they were sharpening the qualities and getting ready to take me to the slaughter. And they had chalk. And someone started distributing more alcohol. And they kept to dance around. The fire was built. I could see it. And they decided to bring the chief. The chief had actually was supporting this company and was against his own people. So they said the chief should come and demand that I disembark from the vehicle. And when they went to call the chief to come, and I said, "Well, this is the end." And I started to pray. And I said, if I'm doing this for my own benefit, then let it be. But if God knows I'm fighting for these people, you'll find a way to save us. And the chief walked to the vehicle as we were sitting down, and those men were just dancing and sweating and beating drum. And he hit my card and said, "Bring down the glass," and I did. He said, "Are you Mr. Brownell?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "These men want to kill you." He said, "I cannot allow them to kill you." Then he turned to the crowd. And he said, "I would not allow you to kill this man. This blood must not waste on this land. If you want to kill him, you must take him to another place. But you can't kill him in my land." Then the securities were angry with him. One of them assaulted the chief. And there was confusion. And the chief got angry and decided that he was going to remove the roadblock. And they started to fight. And he went and they fought over the roadblocks. And we escaped. So it's not just those who live on the land, it's also those who fight to protect those who live on this land. So when I said earlier on that I was grateful that Valerie Gordon, or Spirit, had contributed to provide this rescue, this is what I'm talking about. That he allowed me to come with my family to a safe place to continue to do this work. And guess what happened? I arrived here, the law school, and the university provided me a platform that allowed me to continue my work. 2017, many nights, I was in the library installing, doing research. Many students here have supported my work to fight back this multi-billion-dollar investment. We won the first case, they took an appeal. And in August of 2018, we won victory. We beat them flat. We defeated them. They were so devastated that the owners dismissed the entire management team. They lost over $25 million. They had 300,000 hectares of land to plant palm. Our victory stopped them. They were only able to develop 50,000 with 300,000 in stranded assets. A forest that represents the lungs of the people in that region was preserved because of the platform they created. So I just want to thank you that don't feel you need to have a crowd. Don't feel you need a partner. Like Valerie Gordon, you alone can influence decision and can make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Brownell. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Professor Brownell. Thank you, Jasmine, for sharing a wealth of knowledge with us and also just sharing your stories and your testimony. My name is Kayla Clark. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Black Law Students Association, the Kemen chapter. And it's my honor and privilege to be part of BOSA and to co-host this event with PHRGE and CPAC. Right now, we're going to open it up for questions and comments. I would ask that if you have a question or comment, you would just wait for me to come to you with a microphone so that the entire conversation is accessible to all attendees. Even if you think you're projecting, just rely on a microphone. We're also recording for those of you who came in late. So if you have a comment that you do not want to leave this room, please be cognizant of that as well. Questions, comments? We're going to try to keep it to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Brownell, for sharing your story with all of us. So one thing that I was thinking about is, there's a book from Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, that discussed the role of colonialism within the African continent and underdeveloping Africa. In what ways do you think, the land grabs by these multinational corporations are sort of like a continuation of colonialism or neocolonialism in Africa? And do you see these two things as being interconnected?
You have to see what land grab is. Land grab is also wealth grabbed. It's wealth grab. You got to see what the value of the land is. We just talked about that. These people live on this land. You have transnational companies who are acquiring 300,000 hectares of pristine forests with all this diversity and all its resources. So it's enhancing them. And so that's part of what it is. So you grab the land and you consolidate wealth and you deny people access to that and you push them into the margins. So they're unable to develop themselves and use their resources and lift them off their bootstrap. What many folks don't really do and don't investigate is that in those communities, and I will confess here, that a lot of what I have learned and what I have shared with my students here, I've been taught by chiefs and elders in those tribes who taught them about the land, taught them about the forest, taught them about the river. But not only that, they've developed a resilience and a system of development that have coexisted with nature. They develop business entrepreneurship out of the dirt, out of the ground, in the most innovative and creative way, that have developed models that are sustainable, that coexist with nature. So when you grab the land, you also grab all of that developmental and entrepreneurial potential of the land. So they are able to deliver. The best come out. And what the land grab is denying all of that. So you transform those now into slave-like labor who aren't able to make any decision, who now are subject to the powers of the corporation. If you lease for 100 years and you move them, they don't go back, because I have seen, for example, that those whose land have now been occupied by the oil palm plantations, even where they got employment by the company, and they got temporary layoff, and the employment actually is very temporary employment, it's casual labor, and they got laid off. Those were once prosperous farmers. So think about this. In the regions I work, they had about 500 farmers who were successful. They grew their orchard, they grew their crops and everything. The land was grabbed. They offered them job. A year later, they were dismissed. But not only that, the company was unable to employ the entire 500. They employed only 150. So the 350, what happened to them? So that's what land grab does. It's actually underdeveloped, not just Africa, but many parts of the world, even here in the United States. So when you go and you gentrify a community who are, suffer, what happened to them? They move, you know where they are going. So that's what the implication is. You underdevelopment. So land grab is an instrument of wealth grab and ensure that more people are impoverished. And that's why you're not surprised if you look around the globe today and you see who control wealth. 1% control more than 50% of the world wealth. So you wouldn't be surprised when we have 40 million people here who are hungry, because few of people who are controlling wealth are making the decision. Those corporations is up the food chain. We've done a lot of that. If you want to just take a look at the transnational corporation and see how the corporate structures are based, and we did that with companies that are working. They will have one arm in one country, in another country, and they go through series of layers. And most times you even find who are owning them. But when you finally get to the top of the food chain, you just find one individual whose all that wealth is. So in Liberia, for example, we did the food chain. We figure out that some of those who are actually investing in this company are from the United States. There's a company here, it's a $6 trillion investment in San Francisco. We just put the money. Well, they set up private equity firms. The private equity firms become the major shareholders in the company. They set up a top parent company that set up a series of subsidiaries. And that's how the wealth is being concentrated.
Other questions? Comments?
Don't tell me there are no questions here. But people are so tired. Maybe I'm boring you.
Hi, thank you very much. So I was curious, with your examples, Nicaragua and Kenya, what happened with, what was the outcome for the people who lived on the land?
In Nicaragua, for example, because of the decision of the court, the government was forced to pass legislation recognizing that land, actually gave the people title deed. In Kenya, the same thing is happening. So there are over 35,000 indigenous people. And so currently now they are trying to figure out how to provide reparation and remove them back to the land. And sometimes I just want to say this for students of law, and I have my students ask me this question. They say, well, some of these things are very voluntary. And I keep saying that's what lawyers are for. Our duty is to take soft law and harden it. So you can go to a regional human rights mechanism, and like in the US here, there's no right to food. Take the government to the Inter-American Commission. Take them to the Inter-American Court, because the government has signed those treaties. The US is a party to the American conventions. They had an obligation, and this is the trend now. Across the US, there are many activist lawyers who are actually using that forum. So I think it's very voluntary. I think it's not mandatory. They want to see serious action coming, because sometimes the US Supreme Court decisions whether goes contrary to standard international laws. There's some of the questions about discrimination. What is intentional, what is not intentional, in areas where the data is so consistent, where people of color and the poor are receiving an unjust portion of pollutant and they're getting sick. But because you're unable to prove that there was an email or a text message or the written communication or the memorandum that said, let's put in the polluting industry. So there was no intent. Even though people are dying, and the court will say, well, you have to prove intent. So you got to figure out how, and the Inter-American Court is disagreeing with that now. So there are cases where the court have said, no, we don't agree with that, and the U.S. government is a little bit very furious. So I'm not too surprised when they are pulling from the Human Rights Council and other things, because this is happening. More people are taking those systems. So you should challenge that. You should just not rely on the U.S. Supreme Court opinion.
Hi, I was wondering if you could comment on climate change forcing communities inland from the coasts, and how do you foresee that putting strain on land rights in the future?
It's going to be a problem, and this is something I've really looking at. So you already see the pressure on the land, and so when sea levels start to rise, when people are going to move, many countries are already facing that dynamics, how that's going to happen. And that's why security of land rights is important, because land rights can serve both in terms of adaptation and mitigation process, in terms of how you define what those rights are really going to be. So if people who are once along sea coast are being displaced, what system of land right we allow them to move inward and stay continuing to thrive and survive. Because you got to remember that it was not their cause that they've been displaced from the coastal areas. It's what climate change is, what climate change implication is. That means the whole question of climate change is not going to influence a lot of policy and legal decisions making around what that's going to be like. Because people who are not being internally displaced will be displaced by climate change. And so you got to figure out what the land rights policies will find a way to address this. There to be a special way of trying to address those who are displaced from the land and more inland. And what kind of accommodation is being provided for that? And that's why under the convention, for example, there's a whole discussion about adaptation and what that would be like for people that who face sea level rise. It's not just for citizens who are internally displaced. It's even for countries. There are countries who the prediction and the simulation are shown may not exist anymore. For example, I know of Tuvalu, who has gone to Papua New Guinea and has purchased land to move a citizen to Papua New Guinea. So when Tuvalu is lost to the ocean, would they be a country within the country? Would they be citizens of Tuvalu or would they be citizens of Papua New Guinea? So those questions are coming up, both in terms of international policy, but also in terms of domestic legislation, how you address those. And I think the more and more we look at how we can develop a parameters and the dynamics for adaptation, that would be very helpful.
Yes, sir. I certainly appreciate your lecture. My question is, we talk about the corporations who come in places like Africa, West Africa, and try to grab land, but what about the leaders who are in these countries? Do you not think that if you dealt with the leaders, you wouldn't have this problem so far as the corporations coming in? Because they can come in unless the leaders let them in.
There's something I always talk about when I go around, and giving talk, and it's called corporate capture. My dear, the corporations have captured the apparatus of the state. Sometimes we make believe, and I always say that, and you might even say it. You believe that you are a citizen of the United States, and I believe that I'm a citizen of Liberia. And most time, I always do that. I'm sorry I didn't bring my passport this time, and I left my passport and say, yeah, this is a Liberian passport. But I'm a citizen of Exxon and Chevron and Gordon and others because they are the ones who are making the decisions of our country. They're taking the policies. Why? Because think about this. What kind of system of governance, what kind of system of investment, what kind of system of development will allow for wealth concentration in the hand of the few? How come 10, 20, and sad to say for my white brothers here, white men control more than 50% of the world wealth? What is allowing for that? You can tell me, where is the system of free enterprise? No. What system of governance will allow in the most powerful, the most wealthy, and think about all of that, that 40 million people are going hungry every single day, and 6 million of them are babies. Who's making those decisions? So, people are accountable to the corporations. You go and you vote for them, but you know exactly who they are accountable to, who instruct them. This is the problem we face. It's not just an African problem. It's a global problem of corporate capture of governance around the world. That's what we face. When I was attacked by those men, it was the corporations who were instructing the government what to do. President government what to do. And that's why the citizens need to stand up to counter that. It's people's power. It's us trying to say, no, we're not going to allow this model of development. We're not going to allow this to grab the land, to make folks hungry, to dump pollution in poor communities, to destroy forests, that it benefits all of us. They are so high, mighty, and rich that they don't care. Maybe they figure out how, when we start losing oxygen and we are wearing gas masks around here, how they're going to survive. They're rich. Maybe they find another planet to move on to. This is what the problem is corporate capture. This is what is going on. And to figure out how to hold them accountable and how we can use our pocket. And I said, in some of my work around the oil palm, I tell folks, I've done oil palm. It's an ingredient that is all over the place. I've given talks here. How many people are aware that the chocolate you eat, that the ice cream, that the nail polish, that the lipstick that you wear has oil palm ingredient in it? So on Valentine's Day, when you're buying a bar of chocolate, you send it to your loved one, you're giving them love. In my part of the world, in Liberia, where I come from, in West Africa, in Central America, in Southeast Asia, destructive development are having an onslaught on people. I'm a human rights defender. Are you aware that every week 4 human rights defenders are slaughtered? Are you aware of that? When I talk about my experiences, people say, you always get emotional. You have a trauma, it's PSTD. I say, yeah, so we have to treat you, but don't keep talking about this. And I said, I will keep talking about this. I will never feel embarrassed if I cry. I know I'm hurt. I know that's what I wanted to do. But I have to be a voice for the people who were murdered and are being murdered every week, 4 of them. And I guess what it is? Those who are exiled like me from my home, who only came here in one coat suit. My wife is here, my kids were part of. My wife was cooking. When they came to take her away, she left the home with the kids. They didn't know what we were going. Put them out of their friends, their dogs that they love so much, to go to safety. It's corporate capture. So you have to use your power to influence that. Start asking the questions when you buy the next chocolate bar and the next ice cream. Do you have ice cream? Why? Because the food companies like Nestle and Cargill, the investment institutions like BlackRock, the pension funds, the endowment funds are providing a cover beneath their labor and their brain. They're allowing this destruction to go on. And so it's time to tell them, get out of your closet. Stop hiding these destructions. Stop allowing the destruction of the forest. Stop killing indigenous people. Stop murdering human rights defenders. Stop concentrating wealth from the poor. If you took 300,000 hectares of forest land from the poorest of the poor and you own as a company, you are concentrating more wealth into your hand. You are impoverizing them. And then you come and tell me, and you want to really explain to me that you have a contract to develop oil palm when you are impoverizing and killing people. And you want to explain them as a government, it's a policy to develop. What policy of development will go into a community where women are growing an orange orchard and an orange tree will generate anywhere between 8 to 12 bags of oranges. And the bag of orange is sold for $10 United States. So at the end of the year, if she has one orange tree and have 12 bags of oranges, she has $120 US. And the government will decide that we need to put oil palm versus an orange tree. And we remove the orange tree, and they will decide that you must pay them $20 United States for that tree, even though just that market value is $120. Not even talking about the economic value. Is that development? And if it really is development, in whose interest? In whose interest is that development? These are the challenges we face. This is what land grab does. This is what is facing across the globe. And this is what is bringing the migrants. You see the river, you don't see the tributaries. So you're not asking where they are coming. They are displaced. I talk about the history. The United Kingdom, when they displaced them and they cut them off and they were poor, they jumped on the ships and they came here, and we know what happened. You continue displacing them in Africa, in Central America, they are going to find a place to go. And I can assure you, you can build the Tower of Babel and they were going to come.
Yes, Dr. Brownell, I have a question. Speaking of land grabbing within overseas, what are your feelings on eminent domain that the government invokes here in the United States? Because I am a principal and administrator of a school in Florida, and I have seen neighborhoods wiped out due to the government claiming eminent domain.
Well, in the case of land grab, they don't even exercise eminent domain. We hope that sort of due process requirement will come in because they are standards in terms of what the due process requirement will be like for expropriation. They don't do that. So in a case like here, I'm sure the U.S. Constitution and laws are very clear on what that safeguards the business of due process requirement. And they were following those who know exactly what that would be like. So I don't know the specific facts of what this case looks like, but if they are just declared that and they were not following in terms of the full due process requirement, then there will be a question to look into that. But the cases that I have worked on in West Africa and our sister colleagues in other part of the world are all cases where they don't recognize they don't recognize writing those people, even though they lived there for decades. And part of what the inter-American or the inter-African ecosystem are doing is trying to find those recognition. And that's why they define property rights very differently as that collective rights. That when you extinguish that right, you're not just extinguishing a right to a physical asset, you're extinguishing a right to a culture, to a religion, to a way of life. That is what I've done for centuries. So that's why you take it away from them when you break that right. And so you don't want people to feel who are living for all of those things don't have a history and a culture. And that collectivization of rights is how it's informing now the current jurisprudence around property rights in the globe. And just recently, in the United Kingdom, there was a landmark case that a partner group called Lead Day took against Zambian villagers. And the US court, the UK court, fought for those villagers because the UK company had gone to Zambia when engaged in the same stuff and felt, well, she's going to protect it by United Kingdom law. But the United Kingdom felt that he had what we refer to as extraterritorial obligations. You can't leave the United Kingdom and go to Zambia and you create problems. And you have to seek refuge in the UK, you'll be safe. And so they fought against them, and those villagers have victory. We are getting to see a lot of those cases. In Australia, those cases are coming out. So a lot of activists are looking at innovations in the law to try to advance those sort of jurisprudence. And the more we do that, we see it. Here in the United States, Juliana, one of the central legal concept of Juliana, is based on a theory developed many, many years ago in the Philippines by my good friend, Tony Oposa. The doctrine of intergenerational equity that providing standing for even the unborn. So the case who found the Juliana case of climate change against the United States rely on that jurisprudence. So we can just see how cross-country jurisprudence are populating around the world. And hopefully we'll see that maybe that will allow for a lot more harmony. So lawyers in the U.S. will start seeing how lawyers in other countries are, taking cases and winning, and we apply those standards. And the Juliana went up to the Supreme Court, and they sent it back to go and litigate. So that means there's good prospect while this is going on.
So right now I'm going to invite up my Kemet chapter other half, Ryan Rasdell, who is the other co-chair of BOSA.
Thank you, Kayla, and feel free to stand up here with me. I guess I'll use this mic along with that mic. My name is Ryan Rasdell. I'm, I guess, technically a rising 3L, but technically a 2L at the same time. I like the way that rising 3L sounds. So in the spirit of the Valerie Gordon, of Valerie Gordon's legacy, and your legacy and the work that you're doing on behalf of human rights, on behalf of those who are living in poverty, whose lands are being stolen, and particularly on behalf of Black people. We would just really would like to, on behalf of BOSA and on behalf of PHRGE, to present you with this plaque and to thank you for all the work that you've been doing for these communities. And I believe we're having some closing remarks now.
Yeah, you can speak first.
If you need it, it is.
I'm Felipe Gordon Lamar. I am Valerie Gordon's only child. I'm her son. I'm actually 25, so this is the 25th anniversary. I've been going here. If you see that 1999 picture, I was very small. And so this has always been a really big part of my life. And ever since I can remember, I've always felt honored and privileged to be a part of this. And my wonderful mother left this great legacy at this very prestigious institution. So becoming more as an adult, I definitely learned a lot more. I love being in this setting. And so just want to say thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
I am sure my sister would tell you this was her biggest contribution to the world, and this is the one she would be most proud of. I am Carolyn Gordon, and I am Valerie's only sister. It was 4 of us, and she and I were the 2 youngest. We were 14 months apart, and it's always a wonderful, beautiful, bittersweet time to come for me because she was also my best friend. And for me, because I got all the phone calls of everything that was happening when she was here at Northeastern. And several times I thought I was going to have to come up from Virginia and pack her up and take her away. The day she walked out, when y'all had to walk out, anybody remember? She called me, was like, I'm getting kicked out of school today. And I said, just hang in there, sister. Just a little bit about Val is that what you hear is the truth, even from the family. I could tell you stories. Again, she was the oldest of the 2. She was my big sister. And she was the brain, I was the bronze. And even we were 2 grades apart, 14 months apart. Just to give you, show you a little bit about my sister. We both went to Missouri University and graduated from the School of Journalism. While at MU, I would get the calls and she would come hide in my room after she would write articles like the 4-letter word girl, which the women got mad at her. She also wrote an article protesting happy hour and girls' night, and they got mad at her. She would write about other things, and they would get mad at her, and she would come hide in my room. Now, she was also my resident assistant. Okay? And the only time I ever got written up for a violation was by my sister. Val had a passion for humanity, a passion for human rights that I just I'm always in awe of. In fact, one time I asked my mother, what did you want for us? What did you pray for us? And that's special for me because what you don't know, Susan, is that the last conversation I had, my mother died a year and 3 months after Val died. And our last conversation, January, we were talking about making plans to come here that February. And so it's been a part of us. But I asked my mother, what did you want for us? And she said, the only prayer I prayed for all of my children is that you would be good citizens. And I thought, that's it? But I didn't realize how wise and how profound that was. Valerie was a lawyer. I ended up being the minister, which I still gonna give my mom about that one, and the professor, and then brothers who educators and the like. I just want to encourage you now, let me put on my Baptist preacher hat, to whatever you're going through in your life, just know this is not the final destination of it. 25 years ago, when my sister died, I thought my world had ended. And little did I know, 25 years later, you would be celebrating and given honor. Jasmine, you and our law students, that you all would be continuing the legacy. She and I would talk, and she would always just want to make sure she's contributing something to the world. And I would always tell her, even then, I have no doubt your name is going to be somewhere as a legacy. And we argued about it. And of course, she had the mind, so she could always win with that. But to be here today and to have this conversation and to continue to have the conversation, I commend you. Thank you, Northeastern. And just know, you all, the world is waiting for your gifts. No matter what, just keep moving forward. Thank you.
I'm Christian Lamar, Valerie's husband, Feluke's father. I am always humbled when I come back to Northeastern. I'm very proud to be excuse me. I'm very proud to be a product of this law school. And I was very blessed to meet Valerie, and she gave me the privilege and the joy of being her husband. Those, I think a lot of you familiar with Toni Morrison, right? Beloved and The Bluest Eye. And some people have said that with Toni Morrison, when she wrote Beloved, that somehow she was channeling the spirits of the ancestors, and how she wrote and how she could be able to describe what went on during those times. And what I see here, and every time I come back to Northeastern, it's kind of just like what Carolyn said, is a channeling of Valerie's spirit, that she's here in us. And Sweet Honey in the Rock has this song called Breaths, where they says, the ancestors have never left us, that they are here in us and they work through us. We just have to be open to having them work through us. And that's what I feel when I spoke with Balsa this morning. I looked at them and I saw our faces. And that's what Northeastern is about. It is a space, is a very special place that embraces our diversity, embraces our differences, embraces struggle, which Professor Brownell talks about. I mean, Frederick Douglass said, there is no progress without struggle. And that is the hard part, but it's great to have a place when you've been out in the desert that you can come to an oasis where you realize that you're not crazy. We talked about that a little bit today in the Balsa meeting, that having that place and those people that can remind you that you're okay. Professor Brown, you're okay. All right. And Northeastern provided that place where you could come. And that's what it's about. And so we are very thankful. Thank you, Dean Hackney. I remember it was Professor Hackney. But again, that how all these things will work together is such a beautiful thing. So thank you so much to the Northeastern Law School community, our family, on behalf of all of our family and our friends. Yes, sure. I'll let you do that. Make sure. Okay. Who are here? We're going to introduce the folks.
Friends and family of Valerie Gordon, Dr. Jimmy Wilson from Maryland, actually. Are you Reverend Chaplain? Reverend Chaplain, music therapist and jazz singer. Cheryl Jones from Maryland, and our cousin Stephanie Keaton, retired military from Pensacola, Florida. We're grateful that you all are here, and thank you so much for coming. One other thing. And one takeaway today, I am going to hug a tree. Thank you.
And I just wanted one last thing. We have some folks here from that we went to law school with, and our dear comrade and friend, who I was your TA? Mike Hood, and she was a dear friend of us with Valerie and I, Chris Alibrandi O'Connor, class of 95. Thank you all. We appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.